Good afternoon. I'm Detective Inspector Karen Bryce of the County's Manukau Police. I'm here today to address some of the concerns that have been raised following the recent ram raids that have been in the media, particularly following the incident that happened in Ormiston in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Police are aware of the spike in ram raids that is happening. Ram raids are sadly not a new issue, and different crime types do spike over time, but we are aware of this problem and we are addressing it. It's not an issue just in Auckland or just in Counties Manukau, it is across New Zealand. I want to express our concern about this type of offending. The majority of the offenders involved in this are really young. It involves stealing cars, fleeing and driving into buildings. And one of the real worries we have is that it's a tragedy waiting to happen. We are actively investigating every offence. We're also identifying offenders and we're holding them to account. We really recognise the impact this is having on the retail community. It's not just big retailers, it's also small retailers. And we understand that for some retailers, it's also their home that is being impacted, and we do understand their fears and want to reassure them that we are taking this matter seriously and we are investigating all of these offences. Because of the age of some of these offenders, this is not something that police can solve on our own. It's something that everybody in the community can actually have an impact on, as it's such a wide issue. Some of these offenders are as young as 11 years old, out driving stolen cars and involved in this type of offending. To address offending in children who are that young, we need the support of partner agencies. Parents need to know where their children are and take responsibility for them. And the wider whānau needs to look out for children and trying to engage with them. There are things that car owners can do to make their cars a little bit more secure, and certainly there are things that retailers can take action to make their premises less attractive. And certainly in recent days we have seen incidents where bollards have actually prevented a ram raid. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
In terms of the numbers of ram raids increasing, how much have they increased?
They have spiked over, I believe there was a drop last year during COVID, but we have in recent months noticed there has been an increase. I can only talk to Counties Manukau. We have been focusing on these since October last year, and to date we have actually dealt with over 60 young offenders in relation to these incidents. So it's something that we have been addressing actively in our district.
You say you're going to be addressing these. Are there certain material things that you're going to be doing, increased patrols, things like that, that will make a difference?
We are using a range of tools to address these. One of them is increasing patrols in certain areas, but there's other things that can be done. Working with retailers to try and help them protect themselves by looking at options such as bollards. Working with car owners to suggest those certain types of cars that are really popular at being stolen, take that extra step, perhaps with a wheel lock, something as simple as that, just to make their car less attractive. And we are working with other agencies, particularly around the really young offenders, to try and address this. We've also reached out to social media companies, as that is a motivator of this offending. We know that some of these young people are posting their exploits on social media, and that's driving some of the offending. And that's certainly something that we are currently engaged with social media companies to try and deal with.
And are you asking them to get this taken down, or are you asking them to help tracking these people down?
We're working with them to actually address the content and the exposure that these videos are getting, rather than to actually identify offenders.
Well, social media is one reason they're doing it. Why else are these young people doing it?
I think that's a really hard question to answer. There's a raft of reasons why young people as young as 11 would be out in the middle of the night. Certainly it's been a hard few years for everyone, and that may have an effect, but there's wider issues about education, families, family dynamics, and obviously there's a role that social media is playing in this. So I think it's a very hard question to answer, but it's one that we're really keen to address, and we're trying to work with other agencies, the community, and whoever we can to try and stop this offending. Our biggest worry, aside from the huge harm it's doing in retail, is the effects this could have on these really young children, and we want to avoid a tragedy. We know that they are very young, 11 to 14 in a lot of cases, and we have overcrowded cars in the middle of the night being driven by very young people.
Retail and dairy owners are saying that it's only a matter of time before someone dies. How worried are you about that, and I guess what can we do to make sure that doesn't happen?
Look, we are really worried. As I've said, this type of offending, it causes huge harm, not only the young people involved, but to our retailers. The actual items stolen often are well outweighed by the damage done to the businesses by what is actually happening. So we understand. What we are doing is we're basically holding the offenders we identify to account and working with other agencies, working with their families to try and get these young people back on track. But like I said, this is something that is a bigger issue than just for police to deal with. We need everyone to try and get these young people back on track because it is, like as you said, it's horrendous for the retailers, but we also have that worry for the young people themselves.
Do you feel like you're getting enough support from other agencies, not just from the police?
Absolutely. We have the tools we need, and we're working with other agencies. I think it's a wider community problem as to why 11-year-olds are out in the middle of the night. Certainly I wouldn't expect my 11-year-old to be out in the middle of the night. And why are they out there and why are they offending? And that's something that can only be addressed by communities, by the police and our partner agencies, all working in conjunction to try and put these young people back on the right path.
How many of these offenders are you actually catching? You mentioned 60 before, but how many are going unprosecuted?
So with the RAM raids themselves, we actually do have a high rate of enforcement. These are not sophisticated crimes. I don't have the statistics for you, but we do actually identify a lot of these young people. But as I said, they're 11 to 14-year-olds, and that's a really different age group to work with than an adult offender. So we have to look at different ways of dealing with these young people to address what they're offending and prevent further offending.
What's the response you've had from social media companies? Are they being cooperative?
Absolutely, really good to deal with.
Any in particular that you're focusing
Oh
on?
look, we're dealing with different social media companies, but I have to say they are really receptive to our inquiries.
Is TikTok an issue?
No. All the social media companies we've engaged with have been really responsive to us, and it's an ongoing process, an ongoing discussion with them about what role they can perhaps play to try and help us address this issue.
Is the National Retail Investigation Support Unit operating?
It is, and they are engaging with some of the retailers involved who are victims of this offending, and they are certainly assisting them with prevention advice.
Is that getting resolved, do you think?
Look, I don't know about, I don't have any information on the results of that. I just know that they're actively engaged with a lot of the victims, retail victims who are actually involved with this offending.
What's your security advice for shopkeepers themselves?
Look, I think in relation to this type of offending, bollards are really something that is worth installing. I know that particularly for small retailers, this is a cost, but they do deter offending. Over the last few days, there have been incidents across Auckland where bollards have prevented offending.
Are you worried somebody could be killed in instances like this? We saw the cars zooming through the mall at Ormiston.
Oh, absolutely, that's a huge risk. Wherever a vehicle is involved in a crime, there is a big risk, and the footage is quite clear. Those cars are travelling through places where there are potentially guards, cleaners, and members of the public could be put at risk. That's the reason we are so concerned about this type of offending. Huge harm to the retailers, but also that real risk to those involved, members of the public and people in the stores.
Talking about social media, many times retailers, they come to police and say that they have identified their stolen items. but we complain that police mostly is not able to follow it up. So what do you have to say about that?
For all this offending, our aim is to investigate every offence. All the offences since October last year in Counties Manukau have been dealt with by a major crime team and are investigated by detectives. We are taking it seriously, and we do want to engage with retailers, and when retailers come to us with information, we do act on it.
And talking about many of the steps that you have mentioned, cooperating with retailers. So I think police have been working in that line for many years, including like Operation Tukang that was run from here. But still we are seeing the spike in this retail crime, particularly in the last 12 odd months. So is police considering new ways or doing something innovatively to tackle this rising retail crime?
Look, the offending itself is nothing new, as I've said. Ram raids have been going on for a long time. There is a spike, and we understand the huge impact that this has on retailers. Some of these smaller retail stores have actually been structurally damaged. So we understand that, and we are continuously working to try and address this problem. As I've said, the offenders are really young, and therefore it's forced us to look at different ways of trying to deal with this problem. But it's something that police alone cannot solve. It's a community issue as to why there are 11 to 14-year-olds out there in the middle of the night driving stolen cars and crashing into stores for sometimes very little commodities.
In terms of a short-term resolution, I know long-term we're going to see, police working with other organisations to make sure that these young people are kept, off the streets in the middle of the night. But are you worried about copycat attacks, and are you planning on having more security and more police, perhaps at points that you think may be the next target?
Look, we are actively patrolling throughout the night. We have vehicles out there. We are looking at what we can do, and we are stopping cars in the night that have 3, 4, 5 juveniles. So we are actually catching and identifying and dealing with young people who are out in the night who are likely to have been going on to commit this type of offending. So we are taking this seriously, and we are doing everything we can to address the problem.
Do you have enough police out there? Are there enough police out there patrolling the beat at night time?
But
Do you have resources to deal with this problem currently?
we have the resources we need, we have the tools we need, and the staff we need. We are out there, we are locating these young people, dealing with them during the night. We are finding them in stolen cars, and post some of the ram raids, we are identifying those involved and holding them to account. We have the tools we need, but we are looking for wider assistance from the wider community to try and address this offending because it has such a huge impact across a wide range
And just
of sectors.
the expert spoke to Newsart last night and said that security expert, they thought that the change in policy of tracing cars made these criminals feel like they could get away with the crime. Do you think that has contributed to it?
Our people make decisions every time they're out, and that's all based around risk. As I said earlier, one of the tragedies we really want to avoid is a carload of young people, 11 to 14, crashing in a stolen car, and that's something that we are trying to address by dealing with these young people, putting their families engaged with other agencies, and looking for this wider support of the community to get these young people back engaged and become productive members of society, because they are still really young.
So do you think the change in pursuit policy has made a difference or not?
We work within the policies we have, and we are still out there dealing with people in stolen cars, and we risk assess every time we deal with offenders.
Thanks for getting involved in that.
Thank you very much.